in the shadowed vaults of the Frostspire Citadel, where the moon's pale gaze pierced the eternal winter like a lover's unanswered plea, a single silver thread unraveled from the hem of Mireth Loon's tattered cloak, whispering of destinies long denied. The wind howled through the jagged spires of the citadel, carrying the bite of mountain snow that clung to Mireth's skin like the weight of unspoken judgments. She moved through the grand hall as she always did, head bowed, footsteps muffled on the flagstones, slick with melt from the hearth's dying embers. The air was thick with the scent of pine smoke and polished iron, mingled with the faint metallic tang of blood from the morning's hunt. Omegas like her were shadows in this realm, woven into the fabric of the pack, yet never truly part of it. Mireth had learned that lesson early, etched into her bones by the rejection that had shaped her life. Born under a blood moon that the seers had called ill-omened, Mireth was marked from her first breath as unworthy. Her family, simple herders on the frozen fringes of the Weir territories, had offered her to the Citadel's service in hopes of sparing their own hides from the Alpha King's endless wars. But even there, among the sculleries and the silent labors, she was less than the lowliest beta. Worthless, her overseer had snarled once, after she'd spilled a basin of steaming water during a storm that rattled the iron-barred windows. The word had lodged in her chest like a thorn, blooming into a quiet conviction. Her life was a flicker, easily extinguished, demanding nothing from the world. Tonight, the hall thrummed with the court's restless energy. Torches flickered in their sconces, casting elongated shadows that danced like specters across the vaulted ceilings adorned with carvings of snarling wolves and crescent moons. The Alpha King, Kaelin Weir, held audience from his throne of ancient oak and forged steel, its arms gripped by claws that seemed to pulse with the heartbeat of the realm. He was a figure of shadowed legend, tall, broad-shouldered, his dark hair streaked with silver from battles that had claimed more than his youth. His eyes, a storm gray that held the depth of glacial crevasses, scanned the assembly with a weariness that spoke of guilt's unyielding chain. Kaelin ruled with an iron ethic, they said, but the weight of his crown had carved lines of melancholy into his face, a king haunted by the ghosts of decisions that echoed in the empty chambers of his heart. Mireth approached the dais with a tray of mulled wine, her hands steady despite the chill that seeped through her threadbare wool. The silver thread from her cloak, a remnant of her mother's last gift, a simple embroidery of lunar phases that she mended obsessively, caught the firelight, glinting like a secret. It was her only talisman, a fragile line connecting her to a past where she might have been more than a servant. She knelt before the king, offering the goblet with downcast eyes, as protocol demanded. Omegas did not meet the gaze of alphas, lest their submission stir unwanted instincts. But the hall's murmurs faltered as a rival alpha, Lord Draven of the Ironfang clan, strode forward, his entourage a wall of armored betas reeking of fresh snow and ambition. Draven's voice boomed, laced with the arrogance of one who scented weakness in the throne. "Your Majesty, the borders bleed under your hesitations. The southern packs encroach, and you sit here pondering philosophies while our warriors freeze." His eyes flicked to Mireth dismissively, as if she were no more than spilled wine on the floor. Kaelin's jaw tightened, the firelight etching the scar across his cheek, a jagged line from a betrayal years past, when his own brother had turned blade on him under the same moon that now watched through the arched windows. He leaned forward, his voice a low rumble that carried the authority of thunder over peaks. "Hesitation is not weakness, Draven. It is the pause before the strike that spares the innocent." The Lord laughed, a harsh bark that echoed off the stones. "Innocence? In this frozen hell there are none, least of all her." He gestured to Mireth, who remained frozen in her kneel, the tray trembling slightly in her grip. "A stray Omega, fit only for the kitchens or the wilds. Why waste breath on such as she?" The court held its breath, the air growing heavier. laced with the faint howl of wind beyond the walls. Mirith's heart pounded, a visceral drum in her ears, the cold seeping deeper into her veins. She had heard such barbs before, but tonight, under the moon's unblinking eye, they cut sharper. Her worth, nothing. A life offered up like chaff to the wind. The silver thread brushed her wrist, a cool reminder of fragility, and she whispered it aloud before she could stop herself, the words slipping out in a voice barely above the crackle of the fire. "My life is worth nothing, my king." The hall fell into a stunned silence, broken only by the distant weave of a wolf pack on the mountain slopes. Eyes turned to her, pitying betas, scornful alphas, the flickering torches painting their faces in gold and shadow. Myrith's cheeks burned with shame, the snow's chill outside paling against the heat of exposure. She had spoken out of turn, a breach that could mean banishment to the wilds, where the frozen forests claimed the unwanted. Kaelin rose slowly, his presence filling the space like a gathering storm. His gaze, for the first time, settled fully on her, not with the detachment of a ruler, but with a piercing intensity that stripped away the layers of her invisibility. The scar on his cheek seemed to throb in the firelight, a mirror to the hidden wounds she carried. He stepped down from the dais, the heavy fall of his boots echoing like judgment. The court parted, whispers rippling like wind through pines. He stopped before her, close enough that she caught the scent of him. Leather, frost, and the faint underlying warmth of alpha essence tempered by sorrow. Mirith dared not look up, but his voice, when it came, was not thunder, but a quiet forge, resonant and unyielding. "Then my kingdom is worth nothing without you." Gasps rippled through the assembly. Draven's face twisted in disbelief, his hand twitching toward his sword hilt. Kaelin extended a hand, gloved in dark leather, and lifted her chin with a gentleness that belied his power. In his eyes, Mirith saw not pity, but recognition, a shared fracture under the moon's indifferent light. "Rise, Mireth Lune," he declared, his words carrying to every corner of the hall. "You are no longer servant. You are guardian of the crown, sworn to the heart of this realm." The silver thread on her cloak caught the torchlight once more, shimmering as if alive, a symbol of the unraveling hierarchies that bound them both. Outside, the wind rose in a mournful wail, snowflakes swirling against the glass like souls seeking entry, while the moon hung high, bearing witness to the first crack in the ice of fate. The murmurs of the court swelled like a gathering blizzard, swirling around Myrith as she stood trembling in the wake of the king's decree. The silver thread on her cloak seemed to pulse with the rhythm of her quickened breath, a fragile lifeline amid the storm of stairs that pinned her in place. Guardian of the crown, an omega, elevated to a title whispered only in ancient scrolls, roles reserved for betas forged in battle or alphas born to command. The air grew thick with the scent of disbelief, sharp as the frost that clawed at the citadel's outer walls, where the wind carried distant weevoos from the shadowed pines below. Kaelin did not release her gaze, his storm-gray eyes holding hers with an intensity that rooted her to the flagstones. Up close, the scar on his cheek was a raw testament to old wounds, its edges pale against the stubble darkened by sleepless nights. He was no distant monarch in that moment, but a man burdened, his broad frame clad in a tunic of deep indigo wool edged with silver wolf fur, the fabric whispering against his leather bracers as he turned to face the assembly. "Let it be known," he intoned, his voice a resonant timbre that cut through the tension like a blade through ice, "that the heart of Weir beats not in thrones alone, but in those the world deems silent. Mireth Lune stands as guardian, her oath binding her to this realm's fate as surely as my own." Lord Draven's face contorted, his lips curling in a snarl that bared teeth yellowed by the pipeweed of southern skirmishes. He stepped forward, his boots thudding heavily, the iron rings on his fingers glinting like warning stars. "Madness, Your Majesty. An omega? She who cleans hearths and bows to scraps? The packs will howl at this insult. Your borders weaken while you play at poetry with strays. His entourage shifted, a low growl rumbling from their throats, the metallic tang of their armor mingling with the hearth's dying smoke. The court fragmented into factions, betas whispering of innovation, alphas clenching fists around hilts, and the few omegas in the shadows, hidden among the servants, watching with wide, fearful eyes that mirrored Mireth's own. Fear coiled in her chest, cold as the snow drifting through cracks in the arched windows, where moonlight fractured into shards on the floor. This elevation was no gift. It was a chain, heavier than any basin she'd carried. What did she know of crowns, of oaths sworn under the Diusa's unyielding eye? Her life, once a quiet erasure, now blazed in the open, inviting the kingdom's scorn. Instinct urged her to flee, to melt back into the sculleries where invisibility was armor. Yet curiosity flickered, unbidden, a pull toward the king, whose presence radiated not dominance alone, but a melancholy depth, like the quiet ache of a river frozen beneath its surface. Kaelin raised a hand, silencing the rising clamor without raising his voice. Insult? No, Draven. Revelation. The Dusa marks her chosen in blood and thread, not in birthright. Dismiss her at your peril. His words hung in the air, laced with the philosophy that had earned him whispers of weakness among the warlords. He turned back to Mireth, his gloved hand lingering near her arm, not touching, but close enough that she felt the warmth seeping through the chill. Come, he murmured, low enough for only her ears. The night deepens and shadows lengthen. She followed him from the hall, her steps hesitant on the worn stone corridors that spiraled upward toward the king's private chambers, high in the citadel's frost-kissed towers. The silver thread brushed her skin like a secret pulse, guiding her through the labyrinth where torches sputtered in iron brackets, their flames dancing shadows that twisted like forgotten spirits. Outside, the wind moaned, battering the narrow windows with flurries of white, while the moon climbed higher, its light a silver veil over the endless peaks. Mireth's mind raced, fear of the unknown warring with a strange curiosity about this alpha who saw worth where none had before. Was it pity? Strategy? Or something deeper, instinctive, like the pull of pack bonds she had never truly known? They entered a chamber vast yet intimate, its walls hewn from glacial blue stone veined with quartz that caught the moonlight like captured stars. A fire crackled in a hearth carved as a snarling wolf's maw, its warmth pushing back the encroaching cold, though the air still carried the crisp bite of winter. Furs draped a high-backed chair near a table strewn with maps marked in crimson ink, borders bleeding like wounds, strategies etched in the king's own hand. Kaelin shed his cloak, revealing the broad expanse of his shoulders, marked by faded scars that spoke of battles where mercy had cost him dearly. He poured 2 goblets of amber mead from a decanter, the liquid glowing like liquid gold in the firelight, and offered one to her without ceremony. Drink, he said, his voice softer now, stripped of the throne's armor. The court will rage, but here, in this refuge, we speak truths. Mireth accepted the goblet, her fingers brushing his, a spark, instinctive, that sent a shiver through her, not of cold, but of something primal, denied by years of suppression. She sipped, the mead's honeyed burn warming her from within, loosening the knot of fear. Curiosity won a foothold. She met his eyes fully, searching the glacial depths for intent. "Why me?" she whispered, the words tasting of vulnerability, like blood on the tongue after a fall. An omega, nameless until tonight. Your kingdom. It risks all for a whisper. Kaelin leaned against the table, the fire etching his face in flickering gold and shadow, his expression a mask of guarded melancholy. Because in your eyes, I see the wound I carry, the rejection not of others, but of self. I rejected mercy once, in the shadow of that scar. He touched the jagged line on his cheek, his finger tracing it absently, evoking the metallic scent of old blood. A brother's blade, under a moon like tonight's. I spared him, and it haunts me still. You spoke your worth as nothing, yet in that honesty you claimed more than thrones ever could. The connection stirred, instinctive, a thread weaving between them, born of shared fracture. Yet she denied it, rationalizing the warmth in her chest as Mead's illusion, the curiosity as survival's ploy. Fear lingered, sharp as the wind's howl beyond the walls, where weavows echoed like warnings. What enemy might this bond summon? Draven's ambition? The pack's unrest? The silver thread on her cloak caught the fire's glow, shimmering as if alive, a symbol of fates intertwining against the storm. As the night deepened, the chamber's silence wrapped around them, broken only by the fire's crackle and the distant rhythm of her heartbeat, syncing unwittingly with his. Outside, snow fell in veils, blanketing the world in white forgiveness, while the moon watched, patient and eternal. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The fire's embers pulsed like a weary heart in the chamber's gloom, casting elongated shadows that clawed at the glacial walls as if seeking escape from the night's unyielding grip. Mireth sat on the edge of a fur-draped bench, the goblet of mead cradled in her hands. Its warmth, a fleeting counter to the chill that seeped through the stone from the howling winds outside. The silver thread on her cloak, that insistent whisper of her mother's lunar embroidery, caught the dying light, twisting like a vein of moonlight in the dim. It grounded her amid the swirl of emotions, fear's sharp edge, curiosity's tentative bloom, and something deeper, instinctive, that she pushed down like a forbidden breath. Kaelin paced before the hearth, his silhouette a monolith against the flames, the scar on his cheek a stark silver line in the fire's glow. He spoke of the kingdom's fractures, not as a king reciting decrees, but as a man confessing to the dark, betrayals from within the pack, borders fraying like old wounds under the pressure of rival alphas like Draven, whose ambitions reeked of blood and iron. The Deusa weaves fates in silence, he murmured, stopping to gaze at the window where snow lashed the glass in frantic veils. But silence can be shattered. You, Mireth, are that crack in the ice. She wanted to protest, to unravel his words as mere royal flattery, a tactic to quell the court's unrest. Her life had been a tapestry of invisibility, woven from rejections that left her adrift in the citadel's underbelly. Overseers' sneers, Beta's pitying glances, the endless labor that numbed the soul. Worth nothing, she'd believed, until his voice had named her otherwise. Yet doubt lingered, cold as the draft whispering through the chamber's seams, carrying the distant weavos of wolves prowling the frozen slopes. What refuge could this be, if it invited the storm closer? A sudden thud echoed from the corridor beyond the heavy oak door. Boots on stone, muffled voices laced with urgency. Kaelin's hand went to the hilt of the dagger at his belt, his body tensing like a bowstring drawn taut. "Stay behind me," he growled, low and protective, the alpha instinct flaring in his eyes, storm gray now edged with feral silver. Mireth's pulse quickened, the mead's honey turning to ash in her throat. She rose, clutching the goblet like a shield, the silver thread brushing her wrist in a cool, reassuring glide. The door burst open with a gust of icy wind, admitting two of the king's loyal betas, scarred warriors clad in cloaks dusted with fresh snow, their breaths ragged plumes in the fire-lit air. "Sire," the elder gasped, his face etched with the pallor of midnight dread. "Draven's men. They've breached the lower gates under cover of the blizzard. Torches in the outer yard, 20 strong at least. They cry treason. Claim your elevation of the Omega mocks the old ways." The words landed like blows, the metallic tang of fear sharpening the chamber's pine-scented warmth. Mirith's knees weakened. This was no distant politics, but the blade's edge turned toward her. Draven's scorn in the hall had been a prelude, his laughter a promise of retribution. She was the spark now, the Omega whose naming ignited the powder of hierarchy's rage. Instinct screamed flight, to the sculleries, the shadows where she'd always hidden. But Kaelin's presence anchored her, his scent of leather and frost wrapping around her like an unspoken vow. "Traitors skulk in the dark," Kaelin snarled, striding to a chest by the wall and flinging it open. Inside gleamed an array of steel, short swords etched with lunar runes, a cloak of reinforced wolf pelt. He tossed the latter to her, his gaze locking on hers with a fierceness that pierced her denial. "Put this on. We're not prey tonight." No command, but a shared resolve, empathy flickering in the space between them, his guilt mirroring her shame, two wounds seeking suture in the face of the encroaching howl. She donned the cloak, its weight a novel armor, the silver thread weaving seamlessly into its hem as if destined. The betas flanked the door, swords drawn, their breaths sinking with the fire's crackle. Outside, the storm raged fiercer, weavows blending with the clamor of approaching footsteps, boots crunching snow, the clash of metal on metal from the yard below. Kaelin drew his own blade, a longsword whose hilt bore the whir crest, a crescent moon cradling a drop of blood-red ruby. "The enemy is common," he said, his voice steady as glacial flow, "but so is our strength. Fight with me, Mirith, not as guardian in name, but in blood." The first intruders spilled into the corridor, shadows lunging from the torchlit gloom. Draven's betas, faces twisted in zealous fury, blades glinting like fangs under the moon's fractured gaze through the windows. A clash erupted, steel singing against steel, grunts and curses mingling with the wind's wail. Kaelin moved like tempered fury, his sword a blur that felled the lead attacker with a precise arc, blood spraying dark against the stone, its coppery scent thick and visceral. Mirith, heart thundering, seized a fallen dagger, its handle warm from use, and struck out instinctively when a beta lunged past the king toward her. The blade bit into flesh, shallow but true, the man's howl echoing her own inner storm. In that moment, protection became bond. Kaelin's glance over his shoulder, amid the fray, held not command, but gratitude, a recognition of her fire beneath the frost. She parried another blow, the silver thread flashing as she twisted, the cloak's pelt shielding her from a glancing strike. Empathy bloomed visceral, his melancholy, her rejection, forging a link stronger than blood oaths. He was no distant king, but a partner in the chaos, his ethic of mercy now laced with the raw necessity of survival. She felt it in the heat of battle, the pull denied no longer, rationalized as mere adrenaline, yet undeniable, like the moon tugging tides from hidden depths. The betas held the door, bodies piling in the corridor like fallen snow, the air heavy with sweat, blood, and the acrid bite of scorched fur from a toppled torch. Draven's voice boomed from the shadows beyond, a roar of thwarted ambition. The Omega dies tonight. The throne bleeds for its folly. But Kaelin countered with a bellow that shook the rafters, driving the attackers back into the storm-whipped night. As the last foe retreated, footsteps fading into the blizzard's muffle, the chamber fell into panting silence, broken only by the fire's renewed snap and the distant, fading weavows. Mirith leaned against the wall, dagger slick in her grip, the silver thread stained with a fleck of blood that gleamed like a prophecy fulfilled. Her body ached, but her spirit stirred, empathy transforming into something profound, a bond etched in the heat of shared peril. Kaelin sheathed his sword, turning to her with eyes softened by the ordeal, the scar on his cheek a badge of endured pain. He reached out, wiping a smear of blood from her cheek with his thumb, the touch electric, tender amid the ruin. "You fought as one born to it." he whispered, his breath warm against the cooling air. In you, I see redemption's thread. Outside, the moon pierced the clouds, its light a silver benediction over the bloodied snow, while the wind carried the scent of thawing ice, a promise of refuges yet to come. Fragile as the bond now woven between them, the chamber's air hung heavy with the aftermath of battle, a metallic veil of blood and sweat mingling with the hearth's fading smoke, as if the very stones exhaled the night's violence. Mireth's chest heaved, each breath a ragged pull against the chill that clawed back into the room now that the door stood ajar, admitting gusts laced with the crisp bite of snow. The silver thread on her cloak, flecked with crimson, seemed to throb faintly in the moonlight, spilling through the narrow window. A living vein, pulsing with secrets she had long buried beneath layers of self-doubt. Her hands trembled as she released the dagger, its clatter on the stone floor echoing like a confession. The warmth of exertion giving way to a bone-deep cold that seeped into her marrow. Kaelin stood before her, his broad frame silhouetted against the fire's embers, the long sword sheathed, but his presence still humming with the Alpha's restrained ferocity. Blood streaked his tunic, not his own, darkening the indigo wool to near black, and his storm-gray eyes searched her face with an intensity that unraveled her defenses. The scar on his cheek caught the silver light, a jagged reminder of betrayal's past, mirroring the hidden fractures in her soul. He stepped closer, the scent of him. Frost-kissed leather and the underlying musk of exertion, wrapping around her like an invisible tether, instinctive and undeniable. Yet she resisted, rationalizing the pull as the haze of survival, her mind whispering that such bonds were illusions for those like her, omegas cast aside like winter's first snow. You held your ground, he said softly, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the silence, tempered by the melancholy that shadowed his every word. Not as a servant, but as kin. The Diusa honors such fire. His gloved hand hovered near her shoulder, not touching, but close enough to stir the air between them, charged with unspoken empathy. In his gaze, she saw his own guilt reflected, the weight of a crown forged in Mercy's forge, yet scarred by the wars it could not prevent. Mireth wanted to retreat, to dissolve into the shadows where worth was measured in silence. But the silver thread tugged at her awareness, warm now against the cooling fabric as if awakening from dormancy. A shiver coursed through her, not from the draft, but from deeper within, a stirring like the moon's tide rising in hidden depths. The betas, their faces gaunt with exhaustion, dragged the fallen intruders' bodies into the corridor, their grunts and the scrape of boots on stone punctuating the quiet. One paused, glancing at her with newfound respect, laced with wariness, before vanishing into the gloom. Outside, the blizzard's howl softened to a mournful sigh, weavows fading into the distance as if the wilds themselves acknowledged the fragile sanctuary reclaimed. Kaelin turned to the window, his profile etched in lunar silver, and murmured, "The night reveals what daylight conceals. Draven's retreat is but a breath. The true storm brews in the heart of the pack." As he spoke, a vision unfurled in Mireth's mind, unbidden and vivid, like frost patterns blooming on glass under the moon's touch. She saw paths, not mere trails in the snow, but luminous threads weaving through the citadel's veins, glowing with an inner light that revealed hidden dangers. Shadowed figures slinking through the lower halls, Draven's loyalists planting whispers of treason among the guards, a betrayal coiling toward the throne like a serpent in the roots of an ancient pine. The silver thread on her cloak ignited in her perception, not burning, but illuminating, connecting to those ethereal lines as if it were the spindle from which they spun. Her breath caught, the goblet forgotten on the table, mead spilling in a slow, amber rivulet that mirrored the blood on the floor. Gasping, she clutched at the thread, her fingers tracing its embroidered lunar phases, and the vision sharpened. Flashes of faces, scents of pine and iron, the copper tang of impending violence. It was no dream, it was a gift, long dormant, born under that ill-omened blood moon of her birth. The seers had called it a curse, her family whispering of ill luck that demanded her exile to service. But here, in this chamber of fire and frost, it manifested as truth. The Pathfinder's sight, the rare Omega Dawn that mapped destinies amid chaos, guiding the lost through moral tempests. Her body trembled, the cold amplifying the surge, wind rattling the window panes as if the Deusa herself exhaled approval. Kalen whirled at her gasp, his eyes widening as he caught the ethereal glow emanating from the thread, faint but unmistakable, casting prismatic shards across the walls like captured starlight. He knelt before her, not in submission, but in reverence, his large hand enveloping hers over the cloak, the leather of his glove grounding the ethereal rush. "What do you see?" he urged, his voice laced with awe and the dawning realization that pierced his melancholy like dawn through clouds. The alpha in him sensed it instinctively, the bond deepening, her essence resonating with his, a key turning in the lock of his haunted fate. Words tumbled from her lips, halting at first, then flowing like thawed river ice. Paths, betrayals in the shadows, Draven's men in the armory, seeding doubt. They aim for the dawn council, to strike when the moon wanes. The visions cascaded, moral crossroads etched in light, choices of mercy versus retribution, power yielding to compassion, her rejection transmuting into the realm's salvation. Tears stung her eyes, hot against the chill as the weight of it settled. The dom she had denied, fearing it marked her as other, now revealed her as essential. Kalen's face transformed, the lines of guilt softening into wonder, his grip tightening with a tenderness that spoke of redemption's promise. "The Deusa's thread," he whispered, tracing the silver line with his free hand, its glow reflecting in his glacial eyes. "You are the Pathfinder, Mirith, born to illuminate what kings cannot see alone. My destiny. It was never the throne. But this, you, the key to healing the wounds I've wrought." The confession hung between them, visceral and profound, the air thickening with the scent of pine smoke and awakening power. Outside, the moon crested fully, bathing the snow in unyielding silver, while distant weavos rose in harmonious chorus, as if the wilds celebrated the revelation. In that moment, fear yielded to purpose, the instinctive connection no longer denied but embraced, rationalized as fate's inexorable weave. Yet the night whispered warnings. Such gifts invited envy, and Draven's shadow loomed larger now, a trial of blood and choice on the horizon. Mireth met Kalen's gaze, the silver thread binding them like a vow, its light a beacon against the encroaching dark. Subscribe if you believe mercy can crown even the fallen. Comment Luna if you'd walk through the storm for someone who saw the Dawn Council convened in the great hall of Frostspire Citadel, where the first pallid light of a reluctant sun filtered through the arched windows, staining the snow-dusted flagstones in hues of bruised lavender and steel gray. Mirith stood at Kalen's side, the silver thread on her cloak now a subtle gleam beneath the heavy wolf-pelt mantle he'd insisted she wear, a garment of protection, yet one that chafed against her skin like the weight of eyes upon her. The air hummed with tension, thick as the frost that rimmed the rafters, carrying the mingled scents of damp wool, oiled leather, and the faint, underlying copper of unease. Weavows echoed faintly from the mountain passes, a chorus that seemed to mourn the fragile peace reclaimed in the night. The pack assembled in fractured ranks, betas loyal to the throne, their faces etched with the weariness of skirmishes past, alphas from lesser clans, postures rigid with ambition, and the omegas, relegated to the hall's periphery, their gazes flickering between hope and dread. Lord Draven dominated the far end, his iron fang entourage a bristling wall of fur-trimmed armor, eyes burning with the fervor of the betrayed. He had not retreated far after the corridor clash, merely regrouped in the shadowed barracks, his whispers weaving through the guards like roots through frozen soil. Now he paced before the dais, his voice a gravelly thunder that reverberated off the vaulted ceilings carved with snarling wolves and eclipsed moons. "Your Majesty!" Draven spat, his finger jabbing toward Mirith like a blade. "This farce ends here. And Omega, as guardian? It's blasphemy against the Deuce's order, a crack in the pack's spine that invites the southern hordes to feast on our weakness." His scar-riddled face twisted, the torchlight catching the deep red of his cloak, a color that evoked spilled blood more than royal banners. The hall stirred, murmurs rising like wind through pines, betas shifting uneasily as alphas gripped hilts, the metallic rasp underscoring the fragility of unity. Kaelin remained seated on the throne, his storm-gray eyes steady, though the scar on his cheek seemed to pulse with the echo of old pains. He had not slept, Myrith knew. His tunic bore the faint stains of the night's fray, and the melancholy that shadowed him deepened into something resolute, a king's ethic tested by fire. Beside him, she felt exposed, the silver thread warm against her wrist, as if stirring with the visions that had awakened her gift. The Pathfinder's sight whispered now, faint threads of light tracing betrayals in the assembly, a beta guard's averted gaze, an alpha's clenched fist hiding a poisoned dagger. Yet it offered no easy paths, only crossroads, jagged with moral thorns. "Rise and speak your truths," Kaelin commanded, his voice a low forge that quelled the murmurs without force. "But know this, the pack's strength lies not in chains of birth, but in the bonds we choose. Mirith Loon has illuminated threats you ignored, Draven, whispers in your own ranks that plot against the crown." He gestured to her, not as possession, but as equal, the motion drawing gasps from the fringes. Empathy had forged their refuge into alliance, but here, under the hall's unforgiving gaze, it tested her resolve. Love? She resisted the word, rationalizing the pull in her chest as duty's illusion, the instinctive warmth of his nearness as survival's echo. Freedom whispered temptations, to flee this elevation, reclaim the shadows where rejection was familiar armor. Draven laughed, a bark that chilled the air, stepping closer with deliberate menace, his betas fanning out like wolves circling prey. Illuminated by an Omega's fever dreams? You speak of bonds, Kaelin, yet your mercy blinds you. Remember your brother, the traitor you spared, whose blade still festers in our histories. I offer war, not whispers. Rally the packs, crush the South before they scent your folly, or yield the throne to one who values strength over strays. His eyes locked on Mirith, venomous, evoking the overseer's sneers that had hollowed her youth. The hall fractured further, loyalists growling assent to Kaelin, Draven's faction howling for retribution, the scent of impending blood sharpening like a whetstone on steel. Mirith's heart thundered, visceral as the wind battering the citadel's walls, where snow swirled in chaotic veils. The silver thread ignited in her vision, threads branching into dilemmas. Forgive Draven's ambition, born of the same pack scars that haunted Kaelin, or unleash war's crimson tide, claiming her place through violence. Freedom tempted, to renounce the guardianship, slip into exile where her worth remained unclaimed, untested. But love, resisted yet insistent, bloomed in the ache of Kaelin's glance, his guilt mirroring her shame, urging compassion over conquest. What is strength? She thought, the philosophy echoing in her mind like a seer's riddle, if not choosing mercy amid the storm. Kaelin rose, his presence a glacial force, hand resting near his sword but not drawing it. War devours the innocent, Draven, as it devoured my kin. My brother's betrayal taught me that, spared in mercy, yet the wound endures. But you. His voice cracked, melancholy surfacing like blood in snow. You were pack once, forged in these halls under the same moon. Yield your rage or face judgment not as rival, but as brother lost. The offer hung, a moral precipice, forgiveness to heal the fractures, or war to assert the hierarchy's iron law. Draven lunged, blade flashing in the torchlight, but Mireth's gift surged, a luminous path revealing his feint, the true threat from a hidden beta archer in the rafters. "Above!" she cried, her voice piercing the chaos, raw with the terror of choice. Kalen whirled, deflecting the arrow with his sword in a clash that sparked like fire on ice. The hall erupted, blades drawn, bodies colliding in a visceral storm of grunts and blood spray, the copper tang flooding the air as loyalties clashed. Mireth seized a fallen short sword, its runes glowing faintly under her touch, and parried a beta's strike, the impact jarring her bones, the silver thread whipping like a banner in the fray. Draven closed on Kalen, their swords meeting in a symphony of steel, sparks illuminating faces twisted in primal fury. "Mercy is weakness!" Draven roared, his blade grazing Kalen's arm, drawing a line of crimson that mirrored the king's old scar. Mireth fought through the melee, her visions guiding strikes, not lethal, but disarming, choosing mercy even as fear clawed her throat. A beta fell to her blades flat, stunned rather than slain, his eyes widening in shock at the Omega's fire. The bond with Kalen thrummed, instinctive now, accepted in the heat of trial. Love as redemption's proof, not reward. As the clash peaked, Draven stumbled back, bloodied but unbowed, his betas retreating under the Loyalists' press. He spat at Kalen's feet, the glob dark against the stone. Choose her, and the pack fractures. Love or the throne, freedom dies in both. The words struck like a moral blade, forcing the dilemma: pursue forgiveness, risking betrayal's repeat or war, sacrificing the compassion that defined them. Kalen lowered his sword, breathing hard, his wound's warmth seeping through his sleeve, eyes meeting Mireth's across the blood-slicked floor. In that gaze, the choice loomed: love demanding sacrifice, freedom a solitary exile, the silver thread taut between mercy and the gathering storm. The hall fell into panting silence, broken only by the distant weavows and the drip of blood from blades, the moon's fading light through the windows casting long shadows that whispered of renaissances yet unborn, and the ethical precipice they teetered upon. The great hall of Frostspire Citadel lay shrouded in the hush that follows thunder's roar, the air thick with the acrid bite of blood and sweat mingling with the faint resinous whisper of pine from the dying torches. Snowflakes drifted through the shattered windows like ethereal mourners, settling on the flagstones where crimson pools gleamed under the moon's waning gaze, now a sickle of silver slicing the bruised dawn. Mireth's grip on the short sword slackened, the ruined blade heavy in her hand, its edge nicked from parries that had spared lives rather than claimed them. Her chest ached with the rhythm of exertion, each breath drawing in the metallic tang that coated her tongue, a visceral reminder of the precipice they balanced upon. The silver thread on her cloak, stained yet resilient, pulsed against her skin like a second heartbeat, weaving through the chaos as if to bind the fractures before they spread. Draven staggered back against a pillar, his chest heaving, the deep gash across his forearm weeping dark rivulets that traced the iron bands of his bracer. His eyes, wild with the fury of a cornered wolf, darted between Kalen and Mireth, the hall's factions frozen in tableau. Loyal betas with swords half raised, alphas from splintered clans murmuring oaths of allegiance or dissent, their breaths forming ghosts in the chill. The Lord's laughter cracked the silence, brittle as ice underfoot, laced with the bitterness of a man whose ambition had always been his chain. "See the cost of your mercy were," he rasped, clutching his wound, blood dripping in slow, accusatory patters. "The pack bleeds for an Omega's whims. Yield now or watch it all crumble. The throne, your precious bonds, her fragile light." Kaelin's sword lowered fully, the point scraping the stone with a resonant scrape that echoed like fate's verdict. Blood seeped from the shallow cut on his arm, soaking the indigo sleeve. But he stood unbowed, his storm-gray eyes reflecting the moon's pale fire, depths swirling with the melancholy that had long defined him. The scar on his cheek throbbed in sympathy, a mirror to the fresh wound, both born of choices that spared foes at the price of pain. He glanced at Mireth, and in that shared look, the instinctive pull surged, no longer resisted, but embraced as truth. Love, not as fleeting reward, but as the forge of redemption, demanded everything. His crown's isolation, her shadowed exile, woven into a union that could heal or destroy. "The pack's heart is not in blades," he said, his voice steady as glacial flow, carrying to the hall's farthest corners. "But in the wounds we mend. Draven, you were brother once, forged in these stones under the Deusa's eye. This blood, it need not be the end." Mireth's visions cascaded anew, the silver thread igniting in her mind's eye, illuminating paths not of conquest, but convergence. Threads of light coiling from Draven's form, linking to the alphas who wavered, revealing not just betrayal, but shared scars. The loss of kin in border wars, the guilt of survival that mirrored Kaelin's own. Her gift, the Pathfinder's sight, unveiled the moral crossroads with crystalline clarity. War would claim the innocent, power's illusion shattering the realm into frozen shards. Compassion, though sacrificial, could rebirth the pack from its ashes. Freedom tempted her still, a solitary path into the wilds, renouncing the guardianship's weight, reclaiming the nothingness she'd known as safety. Yet the bond with Kaelin anchored her, his empathy a warmth against the hall's encroaching cold, urging her toward the choice that transcended hierarchies. She stepped forward, the wolf pelt mantle whispering against her legs, the short sword falling from her numb fingers with a clatter that silenced the murmurs. The Omegas in the shadows leaned in, their eyes wide with unspoken hope, while Betas parted like mist before her advance. Draven's gaze snapped to her, scorn twisting his features, but beneath it flickered something raw, fear perhaps, of the Omega who had unraveled his certainties. "Stay your hand, Mireth," Kaelin murmured, low and urgent, his free hand extending toward her, palm up in vulnerability, blood tracing his wrist like a vow. The touch, when she took it, sent a shiver through her, electric and profound, the silver thread bridging the space between their palms, glowing faintly as if the Deusa herself approved. "I see it," she whispered, her voice gaining strength, resonant in the vastness, the philosophy blooming from her core like fire from frost. "What is strength if not choosing mercy when the blade sings loudest? You've built your rage on the same rejections that hollowed me, Draven, the pack's silence, the wars that devour the weak. But we are not chaff to the wind. Join us, or fade into the storm you summon." The words poured from her, guided by the thread's light, her body trembling with the surge of revelation, the cold air alive with the scent of thawing snow and possibility. Tears traced her cheeks, hot against the chill, as the vision solidified, a union not of force, but healing, where her dom illuminated paths of forgiveness, sacrificing the throne's isolation for the pack's rebirth. Draven recoiled, his betas shifting uneasily, the hall holding its collective breath as the wind outside softened to a sigh, weavows rising in tentative harmony from the slopes. His face crumpled, the iron mask cracking under the weight of her words, guilt surfacing like blood in melting ice. You dare speak of mercy to me," he growled, yet his sword wavered, lowering inch by inch. Kaelin nodded to her, his eyes alight with wonder and relief, the melancholy lifting like fog before dawn. In that instant, the choice crystallized. Sacrifice the old hierarchies, the guilt's unyielding chain, for a union forged in compassion's fire. Mireth squeezed his hand, the silver thread binding them eternally, its glow spreading to encompass the hall, threads of light weaving through the assembly, mending fractures with luminous grace. Draven dropped to one knee, not in defeat but surrender, his voice hoarse. The Deusa weaves strangely. Forgive this fool's blade. The alphas followed, murmurs swelling into oaths of renewal, the air shifting from coppery dread to the clean bite of fresh snow, the moon's light bathing them in silver benediction. Myreth's heart swelled, rejection transmuting into rebirth, love's proof in the healing it wrought, not reward, but the quiet triumph of souls aligned. Kaelin drew her close, his uninjured arm encircling her waist, the warmth of him a bulwark against the world's remnants of storm. Yet whispers lingered, shadows of old betrayals, the southern threats that loomed beyond the peaks, promising trials yet to come. But in this moment, union bloomed, redemptive and unyielding. Outside, the first rays of sun pierced the clouds, gilding the snow in gold, while the silver thread shimmered like a promise fulfilled, the wilds echoing with weavows of a pack reborn. The sun's tentative gold crept over the jagged peaks, encircling Frostspire Citadel, melting the night's bloodied snow into rivulets that traced the flagstones like veins awakening from winter's grasp. Myreth stood in the grand hall's heart, the silver thread on her cloak, now a radiant filament, weaving through the air in her vision as if the Deusa had spun it from moonlight itself. The hall, scarred by the council's fury, splintered benches, walls etched with blade marks, breathed with the hush of rebirth, the air laced with the clean scent of thawing earth beneath the lingering copper of spilled blood. Weavows rose from the valleys below, no longer mournful but triumphant, echoing the pack's tentative harmony as alphas and betas knelt in the dawn's pale embrace, their oaths mingling with the wind's soft sigh. Draven remained on one knee, his broad shoulders slumped under the weight of surrender, the gash on his arm bound hastily with a strip of his own cloak, crimson seeping through like a confession absorbed. His eyes, once stormy with unyielding ambition, now held the fractured light of a man glimpsing his own shadows, guilt's mirror to Kaelin's, the pack's collective wound laid bare. Myreth's hand still clasped the king's, his palm warm and calloused against her skin. The instinctive bond no longer a resisted whisper, but a steady pulse, sinking with the thread's glow. Love had forged this moment, not as a crown's reward, but as redemption's trial, demanding sacrifice, her exile's erasure, his throne's isolation, transmuted into a union that healed the realm's frayed edges. Yet freedom's echo lingered in her chest, a faint chill like the draft from the broken windows, tempting her to sever the thread and vanish into the wilds where worth was her own unclaimed secret. The Pathfinder's gift surged once more, illuminating the final crossroads, not mere paths of loyalty, but luminous arcs of destiny. War's crimson flood, yielding to compassion's quiet river, power's iron grip loosening for the compassion that bound souls across hierarchies. She saw it vividly, the southern hordes turning back at the sight of a unified pack, Draven's Ironfang standing as brothers rather than rivals, her rejection blooming into the light that guided them all. Faith warred with despair's remnants, the moon's fading sickle a reminder that destinies were not chains, but choices woven under the Deusa's gaze. Kaelin released her hand gently, stepping forward to Draven, his wounds throb a visceral anchor to the mercy he embodied. The scar on his cheek caught the sun's first rays, silvering like the thread, a badge of endured betrayals now offered as bridge. "Rise, brother," he said, his voice resonant and stripped of command, laced with the melancholy that had shadowed him like perpetual dusk. "The blade you raised was born of the same frost that bit us all, the wars that claimed our kin, the silences that hollowed our hearts. No more. Let this blood be the last poured in division." He extended his uninjured arm, not in dominance but invitation, the Alpha's essence tempered by ethic's unyielding forge. Draven hesitated, his breath ragged plumes in the cooling air, the hall's silence amplifying the drip of melting snow from the rafters. Then, with a guttural sound midway between growl and sob, he clasped Kaelin's forearm, the grip firm yet yielding, blood mingling on their skins in a primal seal. "Forgive. The storm in me," he muttered, rising unsteadily, his betas following suit, sheathing blades with reluctant clangs that echoed like chains breaking. The assembly stirred, murmurs swelling into a low chant of Wur's ancient vow, the words rolling like thunder over the peaks, unity in blood and moon. Mirith watched, her heart a drum of profound ache and release. The silver thread vibrating with the weave of fate's aligning, her dom the spindle, turning rejection's thread into the realm's tapestry. But the choice deepened, demanding her own sacrifice. As the pack converged, faces alight with dawning faith, Kaelin turned to her, his storm-gray eyes holding depths of vulnerability, the king's melancholy yielding to a quiet wonder. "Mirith," he whispered, close enough that his breath warmed her temple, carrying the faint scent of frost and healing mead. "You've illuminated what I could not, the path beyond guilt's shadow. Yet this union, it asks everything. The throne's solitude ends, but so does your hidden peace. Will you bind with me, not as guardian alone, but as the heart that redeems this crown? Love as proof, not prize, sacrifice for the rebirth we forge." The wind outside hushed, as if the world held its breath, Weavows falling silent in reverence. Mireth's visions crested. Freedom as exile's cold embrace, or union's fire, destiny claimed through compassion, her worth no longer nothing but the light that crowned the fallen. Tears traced her cheeks, hot against the dawn's chill. As she stepped into his space, her fingers tracing the silver thread where it met his cloak's hem, now intertwined. "Yes," she breathed, the word of vow etched in her soul, rationalization dissolving into acceptance. "For the pack, for the wounds we heal together. Mercy crowns us both." He drew her close, his lips brushing her forehead in a touch tender as thawing snow. The bond sealing with a visceral warmth that chased the last shadows from the hall. The silver thread blazed briefly, then softened to a steady glow, extending ethereal filaments to encompass the kneeling pack, mending invisible fractures with luminous grace. Draven nodded to her, respect dawning in his eyes, the alphas rising as one, the air alive with the scent of pine resin and fresh earth, the sun gilding their forms in gold. Rebirth unfolded, not in fanfare, but in the quiet union of souls. Her Pathfinder's gift illuminating moral paths for all, Kaelin's ethic of compassion vindicated, love's redemption proving its power against despair's tide. Outside, the peak stood sentinel under a sky clearing to infinite blue, the moon's echo lingering in the snow's shimmer, while fires kindled in the hearths, flames dancing like promises kept. Mireth leaned into Kaelin, the weight of her past lifting like mist, every Alpha King's wound healed by the Omega born to it. Rejection's end, destiny's embrace. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe. Because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.